The Vale Corps commander sneered at the lone human sipping coffee, his violet armor gleaming under the station lights. "Insects like you are only tolerated because the council finds you amusing," he spat. But the Green Beret didn't even look up. "Rule 1, he murmured, tapping his mug. "Never interrupt a man before he's done with his morning coffee." What happened next would rewrite the rules of galactic warfare and prove humanity's patience was the deadliest weapon of all. The trade station deck stretched wide, its polished alloy floors reflecting the violet armor of the Vale Corps soldiers. They stood like statues carved from arrogance, their posture announcing 500 years of unchallenged conquest. At the mess table's far end, the human's fatigues showed wear at the elbows, his boots, scarred from climate's no-veil soldier, would endure. The mug in his hands bore a dent near the handle. Impact damage, not neglect. Commander Kylus marched forward, each footfall echoing through the silent gallery of onlookers. His armor's power conduits pulsed brighter with every step, a visual amplifier for the threat. The human's stillness wasn't submission. It was the quiet of a sniper observing crosswinds. Alien merchants whispered in their click tongues, anticipating another humiliation for Earth's forces. Their amused chittering died when the commander's energy blade ignited with a harmonic shriek, a sound known to precede severed limbs. Steam coiled from the human's mug as his fingers shifted slightly. Not a defensive stance. The adjustment of a man ensuring his drink wouldn't spill. When the violet blade whipped toward his neck at neural-enhanced speed, his left palm came up in a motion almost casual. The edge passed millimeters from his jugular, guided aside like a door held open for an unwanted guest. His right index finger tapped the mug's chipped rim. The blade's resonant frequency shattered. Dying embers of violet energy feathered to the floor. Rule 2. The human's voice carried no louder than necessary. "Don't start something you can't finish." Silence pooled across the observation deck. A Vale honor guard's gauntlet creaked as it tightened around a rifle stock. The merchant clan stopped breathing. 10 seconds earlier, this had been theater. Now it was an autopsy, the dissection of galactic power dynamics performed with a coffee mug and 2 sentences. The commander's armor darkened as systems rerouted power from non-essential displays. His mandibles flexed behind his faceplate, processing the impossible. That blade had cleaved through battlecruiser hull plating during the Cerulean Purge. It shouldn't have been stoppable by ceramics and flesh. Yet the human was blowing across, his coffee surface watching the ripples with detached interest. Near the docking umbilical, a Tullix merchant's vestigial wings shuddered. That species hadn't shown fear since the Vale burned their home moons. The human sipped. Steam fogged his sunglasses for half a second, long enough for the commander to miss his eyelids flickering toward the station's overhead vents. Air circulation. Pattern shifted as hidden systems woke from standby. 3 decks below, magnetic clamps released silently on cargo that had been logged as agricultural supplies. The crates floated for precisely 2.3 seconds before orientation thrusters flared. Their trajectories matched the scratched coordinates inside a certain mug's glaze. Back on the observation deck, the commander's second-in-command began transmitting emergency codes. The human didn't glance at the pulsing wrist console. He rotated his mug until the handle's dent aligned with the Vale soldier's formation. The angle matched the approach vector his fleet would take through the nearby asteroid belt. Every being present felt the shift, but couldn't name it. The station's gravity plating hadn't changed. The universe's weight distribution had. A child from a dozen species could have drawn what happened next. The Vale troops leveled rifles. The human set his mug down with ceramic's definitive click. Neutral spectators scrambled for bulkhead shelters they suddenly remembered existed. But the truly perceptive, the ones who'd survived previous regime changes, watched only the coffee's surface. The liquid hadn't so much as trembled during the blade strike. Now concentric rings pulsed outward from an impact that hadn't occurred, inside the mug. Something much larger had just entered the system. The human exhaled through his nose, fogging his glasses again. When the lenses cleared, his reflection showed the station's exterior cameras activating one by one. Their feeds wouldn't reach Vale command centers. The error messages would look like minor subsystem failures. Standard diagnostics wouldn't detect the data being rerouted through the mug's thermal sensors, then bounced off a derelict comms satellite everyone had forgotten to decommission. Over by the viewport, a Veil sentry's helmet turned toward them, stars. His posture recognition software flagged the movement and prompted his display to zoom. The enhanced image showed empty space where the human's fleet should have been. His targeting computer concurred. Neither system registered the coffee's heat signature still radiating from the mug, masking the ionization trails of 17 stealth ships holding position just outside detection range. The commander's blade reactivated with a sputter, its harmonics unstable. He adjusted his grip, a tell the human noted without lifting his head. Elite warriors never fumbled their weapons unless rattled. This wasn't part of the script the Veil had written for lesser species. Their entire playbook assumed opponents would either cower or attack head-on. The quiet sabotage of expectations left them unbalanced. Out in the void, navigation buoys began failing along the main trade routes. Not all at once. Not in any pattern Veil analysts could correlate with tactical advantage. Just enough disruption to scramble logistics while leaving military channels untouched, the precise calibration between provocation and plausible deniability. Back on station, the human finally stood, mug in hand. His shadow stretched across the deck plating, intersecting exactly with the emergency lighting's fail-safe activation node. The system interpreted this as a malfunction and ran a diagnostic. During those 20 seconds of reduced illumination, 300 microdrones detached from the station's maintenance crawl spaces. None of the spectators noticed the temperature dropping as the life support systems diverted energy to compensate for phantom load fluctuations. The human's breath no longer fogged his glasses. He blinked once, slowly, the only outward sign his corneal implants had just synced with the targeting arrays now painting every Veil ship in the sector. Still no one fired. That was the true power play. The Veil could obliterate him where he stood, but the aftermath, the commander's tertiary neural implants were calculating casualty projections when the human finally moved toward the recycler. He didn't deposit the mug, just held it under the scanner for 1.9 seconds, exposing the fissures in its glaze to concentrated radiation. Ceramics aren't supposed to fluoresce when X-rayed. Neither are command override protocols. 2 decks above, a cargo handler's assistant paused while unloading crates marked Terran cultural artifacts non-hazardous. The sealing foam between container seams had the exact molecular structure of a failed Veil stealth coating from 3 wars back. The assistant was still deciding whether to report this when their implant displayed an unscheduled maintenance alert. By the time they dismissed it, the human's mug was back on the table, its heat signature modulating in sync with the station's comm laser alignment tests. A Veil logistics officer 3 sectors away would later swear she saw the telltale shimmer of active camouflage in her peripheral vision. When she turned, there was the ceramic mug sat on the polished alloy table, its surface marred by a network of fine cracks radiating from a single impact point near the handle. The glaze had faded where countless fingers had gripped it over the decades, revealing the rough clay beneath. A dark ring stained the interior at the coffee line's permanent resting level. To the Veil commander's multi-spectrum vision, it registered as precisely what it appeared to be, a worn drinking vessel bordering on disposable. "You cling to relics," the commander observed, his vocal synthesizer layering contempt through 7 harmonic frequencies designed to unsettle mammalian nervous systems. His armored finger extended, the articulated plating retracting just enough to reveal the bioactive fingertip capable of sensing molecular composition. He scanned the mug's material structure. Basic silicate compounds. No energy signatures. This station recycles objects with more tactical value. The human's fingertips aligned with 5 irregular grooves worn into the handle. This mug's been with me longer than most of my commanding officers. A ripple of translated laughter spread through the alien observers. The Pralax merchants especially enjoyed the concept of humans cycling through leaders so rapidly. They misinterpreted the statement as weakness rather than experience. Every species present missed 3 critical details. First, the wear patterns on the handle didn't match typical drinking grip abrasion. They formed precise ovals where a thumb would rotate the mug in quarter turns. Second, The cracks weren't random stress fractures. They originated from 5 equidistant points around the rim, as if subjected to carefully measured impacts. Third, the coffee stain darkened at specific angles, revealing itself as a photosensitive polymer layer bonded to the ceramic. When the human tapped the rim, it produced a tone at 14.4 and 22 Hz, precisely the resonant frequency of the station's emergency comms backup transducer. The sound traveled through liquid rather than air, turning the coffee into a perfectly tuned organic waveguide. Each subsequent tap pulsed in Fibonacci sequence intervals, 1, 1, 2, 3, 5 seconds. The station's ancient repair drones misinterpreted this as a maintenance diagnostic signal and began cycling through dormant subsystems. The groth miners leaning against the viewport didn't notice their reflection subtly distorting as the human's thumb brushed a particular scratch on the handle. The marking appeared accidental, but its depth matched the required micron-level indentation to complete a laser receiver circuit etched into the mug's base. Across the station, 17 decommissioned docking clamps powered on in unison, their activation masquerading as a power grid fluctuation. Package lit. The human murmured into the steam rising from his coffee. The Veil Soldier's translation implants rendered the phrase as meaningless sentimentality. 3 light seconds away, the phrase triggered a different response entirely. Aboard 8 Terran stealth frigates drifting dark in the sector's magnetic shadow zone, tactical officers received confirmation pulses through the quantum-entangled particles suspended in their own coffee cups. The beverage wasn't for drinking. Each mug contained precise measurements of controlled substances that vibrated at matching frequencies when their counterparts altered state. On the station's exterior, maintenance panels that hadn't opened in standard cycles slid aside without alerting the central computer. The human had spent his first 3 days aboard, accidentally spilling coffee near these access points. The organic compounds in the liquid corroded specific control circuits, just enough to disable alarm triggers while leaving mechanical functions intact. What security scans identified as dried spills were actually conductive pathways completing hidden circuits. The mug's chipped edge along the 7 o'clock position wasn't damage at all. When rotated to face the primary observation camera, the irregular surface diffracted light in patterns that temporarily overloaded the visual AI's threat recognition parameters. For exactly 1.8 seconds every 10 minutes, the security system would perceive empty space where the human sat. During these blind spots, microdrones disguised as dust motes entered his coffee's steam plume, riding the convection currents to dispersal points throughout the station. Commander Kylus failed to notice how the human always set the mug down, with the handle precisely aligned toward either the waste reclaimer or the overhead vents. Both systems shared a filtering mechanism that automatically sampled any organic compounds. Each time the coffee's chemical signature entered the station's environmental control database, it overwrote another segment of the security protocols, with dormant code carried in the beverage's molecular structure. Station engineers never questioned why the beverage's temperature fluctuated between 63 and 67 degrees Celsius, thresholds that matched the thermal triggering points for emergency bulkhead seals. The human's sips weren't about consumption. Each time hot liquid crossed the invisible marker 1.3 centimeters below the rim, it completed a circuit that pulsed through the station's structural integrity field generators. The effect was negligible, unless repeated at 7-minute intervals, for precisely 6 cycles. When the human rubbed a particular stain on the mug's exterior, the motion seemed like absent-minded habit. In reality, the friction generated enough static electricity to activate a passive receiver woven into his uniform's cuff. The signal bypassed all electronic monitoring by traveling through his nervous system's bioelectric field before jumping to the station's metal flooring. 3 decks below, the power coupling vibrated in sympathy, gradually loosening a critical plasma conduit's fittings. Alien observers chuckled when the human blew across his coffee's surface to cool it. None realized the exhalation patterns matched the command override sequences for the station's automated defense turrets. The humidity in his breath carried nanoscale conductive fibers that settled on targeting sensors, calibrating them to ignore specific heat signatures. By the time the liquid stopped steaming, 7 weapon emplacements would fail to recognize incoming Terran assault craft. The mug's curved base served a purpose beyond stability. Its radius matched the station's artificial gravity emitters exactly. When placed off-center on tables, the slight imbalance introduced harmonic distortions in the local gravity field. Over hours, these minor fluctuations caused cumulative errors in the inertial navigation systems of every docked Veil warship. The effect was subtle enough to evade detection, yet sufficient to throw torpedo targeting off by 3 critical degrees during combat maneuvers. On the 7th rotation of the mug, in the human's hands a faint click sounded as internal components aligned. No audio sensors picked up the noise. It transmitted through bone conduction directly into the human's skull via implanted receivers. The sound marked the completion of the station's full electronic mapping. Every system schematic now resided in the foam-like lattice hidden between the mug's inner and outer layers, ready for quantum transmission to the waiting fleet. Security scans always identified the vessel as standard ceramic because its most critical elements weren't technological. The clay came from soil laced with microscopic superconducting crystals formed during Earth's last asteroid impact. The glaze contained dormant neural networks grown from genetically modified algae. Even the coffee itself played its part. The caffeine molecules had been isotopically altered to resonate with certain quantum communication arrays when agitated at specific temperatures. When the human finally set the mug down for the last time, it looked no different than when he'd first taken it from the shipboard replicator weeks earlier. The commander would later order it destroyed, vaporized with the rest of the human's supposedly primitive artifacts. Only after the war would analysts realize the mug had already completed its purpose. Its true destruction had occurred days earlier, when the human purposefully cracked its interior lining during a staged accidental drop. The damage released the final set of molecular-scale transmitters into the station's air recycling system, where they proceeded to eat through encryption protocols like termites through softwood. For all the Veil's technological superiority, they never considered the possibility that the entire conflict, from first contact to final surrender, could hinge on something as mundane as a coffee cup. Their scanners searched for weapons, not relics. Their security protocols monitored energy signatures, not beverage temperatures. Their tactical AIs predicted fleet movements, not the subtle rotation of ceramics. The mug's last transmission occurred precisely at the moment the human fleet decloaked. All remaining crystalline structures in the ceramic simultaneously shattered, releasing a burst of precisely tuned radiation that disabled every Veil translation implant in the sector. For 3 critical minutes, Veil forces couldn't coordinate. Our response couldn't understand each other's communications, couldn't even read their own console displays. By the time their systems rebooted with new encryption, the station's main reactors were already venting core plasma in alignment with Terran boarding craft's approach vectors. Survivors would swear the coffee mug had been just a cup. Veterans knew better. It had been the first domino. The human rotated his mug 1/4 turn clockwise, aligning a hairline fracture with the station's primary power conduit. 10 minutes, he said without looking up. That's all it ever takes. His voice carried no inflection, the words flat as a tactical report. The commander's spinal plating flared open in the Veil equivalent of a derisive snort. To break you? His blade reactivated with an unstable whine, its harmonics still scrambled from the mug's earlier interference. The human's left eyelid twitched, the only movement in an otherwise statue-still face. To end you. His fingers tightened around ceramic. The commander didn't notice how the grip shifted pressure across specific stress points in the mug's structure, activating microfilaments woven through its clay matrix. 7 minutes remained. Overhead lights flickered in the agricultural sector. Hydroponic growers muttered about faulty stabilizers. 3 decks below, Terran nanoswarms disguised as electrical surges began eating through backup generator couplings. The damage appeared random, a loose conduit here, a corroded relay there. Only the human knew each failure point marked a coordinate in an unfolding attack pattern. 6 minutes. The human's breathing maintained a steady 12 breaths per minute, unchanged since the confrontation began. Behind his faceplate, the commander's respiratory rate spiked to 28. His bioscanners detected the anomaly, and triggered a calming agent that flooded his bloodstream. The human noted the slight tremor in the commander's blade, the telltale jitter of pharmaceuticals interacting with combat augments. At the observation deck's perimeter, a teeter whale elder anchored itself with prehensile tendrils. Its voice emerged as subharmonic vibrations that made the deck plates hum. Do not corner the predator that pretends to be prey. The translation matrix struggled with the metaphor. Most observers dismissed it as senile rambling. 5 minutes. The human's lips curled without engaging his eye muscles. Empty mirth, the kind snipers display when confirming target acquisition. His retinal display flickered with status updates from sectors the Veil had declared secure. The updates came not through comm channels, but via pressure changes in the station's water reclamation system. Pulses sent through pipes the human had accidentally clogged with coffee grounds during his first week aboard. 4 minutes. The mug developed a tremor unrelated to its holder's pulse. Vibration frequencies matched the startup sequence of Terran tunneling engines breaching the system's asteroid belt. Conventional scanners dismissed the resonance as standard station operations. Only the teeter whale's seismic senses registered the truth, its tremor nodes detecting the subtle shift in cosmic background vibrations. 3 minutes. 12 Veil scout ships conducting routine patrols winked off long-range sensors. Command assumed a comms blackout. The human knew better. His corneal display showed 17 green dots converging at calculated intercept points. The scouts hadn't gone dark. They'd ceased existing in perceptible space-time, their atoms dissembled by precisely tuned quantum destabilizers. 2 minutes. 10 decks above, a maintenance drone froze mid-task, its sensors overwhelmed by sudden gamma radiation spikes. The human didn't need to check his biomonitor to know the readings matched the energy signature of a Terran battle group dropping stealth fields. The radiation came from coffee-derived isotopes he'd seeded throughout the station's air filters, compounds now resonating with approaching warship drives. 1 minute. The commander's second-in-command accessed tactical displays with mounting panic. Sensor logs showed nothing. The human's mug, now empty, began heating itself through exothermic reactions in its ceramic lattice. The temperature precisely matched human body heat, rendering the cup invisible to thermal scanners searching for weapons. 30 seconds. The teeter whale folded its sensory tendrils in the ancient posture of species witnessing inevitability. Across the station, every Terran-made object, from forgotten bolts to discarded ration wrappers, began vibrating at 18 hertz. The frequency had no tactical purpose. It was the resonant tone of Earth's rotation broadcast now as both elegy and awakening. 10 seconds. The human stood, his chair scraping metal. The sound frequency triggered dormant circuits in the station's defense grid. Targeting systems that should have tracked incoming ships instead focused on Veil positions. Reverse-engineered protocols from the mug's quantum foam matrix overwrote security parameters no living engineer could access. 5 seconds. The commander finally noticed his armor's power readings fluctuating in time with the human's pulse. Biolinks established during their initial confrontation now served as backdoors. His weapon systems cycled through diagnostic modes they wouldn't complete. 3, 2, 1. Silence. Then the station's external cameras activated on their own, displaying real-time footage to every screen simultaneously. The view showed 17 Terran dreadnoughts holding perfect formation. Their weapon ports glowed but didn't fire. The message was clear. Restraint could end just as swiftly as destruction. The human placed both palms flat on the table. His fingerprints matched the encryption keys now locking down Veil armories system-wide. 10 minutes wasn't a boast. He finally met the commander's gaze. It was a courtesy. Somewhere in the darkness between stars and entire civilizations, certainty about galactic hierarchy died screaming. The universe hadn't changed. Humanity's position in it had, and the clock was still running. The table's alloy surface reflected the Veil commander's triumphant posture as the human pushed the mug forward with both hands. Scuffed ceramic met polished metal with a resonance that traveled through the deck plating. The sound frequency matched the emergency channel override sequence for the station's defense grid. Finally, the commander said in the tone members of his caste reserved for acknowledging obvious truths. His armored digits closed around the mug's handle with possessive confidence. The trophy fit neatly in his gauntlet's housing, a perfect psychological miscalculation. The veil always assumed custody equaled control. The human's fingers lingered near the mug's base for half a second longer than necessary. His fingerprints registered with the dormant quantum lock woven into the ceramic's atomic structure. Activating. It required precisely 4.3 newtons of pressure applied diagonally across two specific microcracks. "You know where I'm from," the human said, withdrawing his hands. "Surrender doesn't always mean giving up." His thumb brushed the table's edge, a motion the commander's peripheral sensors barely registered. The contact completed a circuit through the human's neural lace, triggering the first failsafe. Station engineers would later determine the temperature in the command deck dropped 1.8 degrees at that moment. Climate logs attributed it to a minor, coolant line fluctuation. In reality, the shift matched the exact thermal conditions needed for certain crystalline structures in the mug's glaze to enter quantum coherence. Sometimes, the human continued while adjusting his seating posture in a way that pressed his thigh against the table's support strut. "It means you're smart enough to save your strength until the fourth quarter." The last word vibrated at 142, Harsam, the resonant frequency of the Veil warship's primary shield generators. The commander rotated the mug, studying the stain patterns that traced decades of human conflict. He missed how the liquid residue inside aligned with an encrypted star map when viewed from specific angles. Nor did he notice the ceramic's internal microfractures, now glowing faintly under certain spectra, the result of embedded quantum dots responding to the human's earlier biometric activation. "Second cup's always colder," the human remarked as alien spectators erupted in approving clicks and chitters. Their translation filters rendered the statement as mundane philosophy rather than tactical code. The phrase "second cup" triggered dormant protocols in every human-constructed device aboard the station, from forgotten fasteners to discarded ration containers. A cheer spread through the observation deck as the commander raised the captured mug in victory. The gesture lifted, a nearly invisible filament from the handle, a monomolecular wire the human had anchored to the table. When drawn taut, the strand resonated at 40 kHz, inaudible to most species but perfectly tuned to interfere with Veil Neuralink communications. 3 decks away, a maintenance drone twitched as conflicting priority signals flooded its tiny brain. It was one of 17 units the human had accidentally contaminated with coffee spills containing self-replicating nanites. As the commander paraded his prize, these drones abandoned their work cycles simultaneously, assembling at precise coordinates mapped out in their subroutine corruption. The human's eyes tracked upward, following the station's curved ceiling toward the docking bay observation ports. His gaze didn't linger on anything in particular, a casual study of architecture that concealed the fact his retinal implants were synchronizing with external tracking systems. No scan detected the quantum entanglement link established through residual caffeine compounds in his tear ducts. Somewhere above the armored plating, beyond the sensor-shielded hull, 17 Terran warships completed final weapon calibrations. Their targeting solutions didn't come from active scanning. Every shot trajectory had been pre-calculated based on vibration patterns the human had transmitted for days by tapping his mug against various surfaces. The fleet's AIs simply waited for the last confirmation pulse. The mug's final transmission occurred when the commander set it down to activate his victory beacon. Contact with the table's alloy surface completed a circuit through microscopic channels worn into the ceramic base during years of accidental drops and impacts. A burst of tightly focused infrasound pulsed through the station's framework, carrying encryption keys in its harmonic nodes. Alien spectators continued celebrating as the signal propagated. None noticed how certain lighting panels dimmed fractionally in sequence. No alarms sounded when emergency bulkhead controls briefly cycled through diagnostics they wouldn't complete. Even the teeter whale's tremor nodes missed the precise moment, when the station's long-range sensors recalibrated themselves to ignore approaching capital ships. Across the command nexus, secondary displays flickered with what appeared to be routine status updates. The characters scrolling across these screens weren't diagnostic reports. They were targeting solutions and assault timetables, displayed openly but rendered unreadable by a simple font substitution protocol the human had introduced weeks earlier, when fixing a malfunctioning food dispenser. The commander's armor registered the temperature spike in the mug's ceramic as standard heat dissipation. In reality, the brief thermal surge marked the final disintegration of quantum-entangled particles, suspended in the clay. Their collapse transmitted directly to matched particles in the leading Terran dreadnoughts' firing computers. Gravity plating fluctuated ever so slightly beneath the crowd's feet, just enough to make several Veil officers adjust their stance. The human remained perfectly still, his posture exactly calibrated to the station's artificial gravity field orientation. His apparent stability wasn't physical superiority. The subtle tremors that unsettled others passed clean through him because his neural lace emitted precise counter-vibrations. One of the Prelax merchants staggered, spilling a drink container in what looked like celebratory clumsiness. The spreading liquid followed patterns etched into the deck plating by years of similar accidents. These channels guided the fluid directly to a junction box the human had left slightly ajar during a previous drunken stumble. Short circuits bloomed through critical systems like ink and water. Overhead, the observation dome's smart glass adjusted its opacity to compensate for imagined stellar glare. The darkening effect concealed the first flickers of drive plasma as the Terran fleet emerged from stealth positions. Against the new backdrop, their silhouettes remained indistinguishable from sensor ghosts for 16 critical seconds. Several junior officers' data slates began displaying gibberish text. They slapped the devices in frustration, unaware the corruption stemmed from a linguistic virus the human had introduced by correcting their translation databases weeks earlier. The garbled output concealed operational alerts about unauthorized access to main weapon controls. Somewhere in the station's bowels, an unattended coolant valve cycled open. The human had adjusted its maintenance schedule during a routine inspection, programming the release to coincide with his surrender announcement. Fog began coiling through lower decks, undermining scanner effectiveness exactly as the first boarding pods launched from approaching warships. The mug sat innocently on the command table, looking every bit the broken artifact the Veil assumed it to be. Ceramic doesn't transmit signals. It doesn't store data. It certainly doesn't coordinate multi-pronged assaults across light seconds of space. The commander's scans continued confirming these facts right up until the moment the station's primary defense turret swiveled to target Veil ships instead of approaching threats. By then, of course, it was too late. Surrender terms had been given. The human hadn't been speaking metaphorically about saving strength for the fourth quarter. His people had a saying about warfare. The first 90% of conflicts are preparation. The remaining 10%? That's just letting gravity do its work, and gravity always wins. Back home, the human said, rotating his wrist to check a watch that wasn't there. We call this the halftime show. His lips moved in what the Veil commander initially mistook for amusement, until he recognized the expression for what it was. A predator counting down the seconds until its lunge. The station's primary lighting failed with surgical precision. Not all at once. First the perimeter strips dimmed, then the overhead panels. Finally, the emergency backups flickered out in cascading sequence, each shutdown occurring 23 seconds after the last, the exact response time of the station's fail-safe protocols when subjected to 3 specific microwave frequencies. Those frequencies now pulsed from the ceramic mug in the commander's hands, its atomic lattice vibrating at carefully calibrated intervals. Deck plates shuddered as artificial gravity fluctuated. The Veil commander stumbled, an impossibility for a warrior of his caste outside of direct hull breach scenarios. His armor's diagnostics showed no system failures. The truth was worse. The gravity shifts targeted only Veil biology, exploiting subtle differences in inner ear structure between species, a biological vulnerability the human had mapped during friendly arm wrestling matches in the station's mess hall weeks earlier. Every view screen in the command nexus activated simultaneously. They didn't display surrender terms or negotiation demands. The images showed fire, not the uncontrolled conflagrations of orbital bombardment, but targeted flames consuming specific structures across 12 Veil core worlds. The patterns formed geometric shapes visible only from orbit, the ancient hunting sigils of Earth's first predators, scaled up to planetary proportions and rendered in burning city blocks. "You misread the game," the human said, his voice cutting through the panicked chatter of alien spectators. He didn't raise his volume. The acoustics in the room had been subtly altered by resonance patterns from his earlier mug placements, funneling his words directly into the auditory receptors of every Veil soldier present. This wasn't a duel. His boot came down on the commander's dropped energy blade, heel impacting the weapon's harmonic stabilizer with perfect force to shatter its tuning crystal. It was the opening play. The mug throbbed with residual heat against the human's palm as he retrieved it. Ceramic that should have cooled after minutes of inactivity retained a foundation-shaking warmth. Exothermic reactions in its quantum-dotted glaze still completing their programmed decay chains. His fingers found the handle's stress points by touch, applying pressure that activated the final command sequence. Outside the station, space itself seemed to ripple. 17. Terran dreadnoughts unwove their stealth fields not in sequence but simultaneously, a maneuver requiring coordination down to the picosecond. Their sudden appearing act wasn't technological magic. It was the result of precisely timed micro-jumps that brought each vessel out of hyperspace at coordinates the human had marked weeks earlier, using coffee spills on observation deck viewports. The dried residues contained compounds that subtly warped the transparent steel, creating refraction patterns that matched fleet arrival points. Alarm klaxons remained silent. The human had sabotaged their activation circuits by accidentally spilling conductive fluid into control panels during various drunken incidents. Instead, the station's entertainment system kicked on, another malfunction the human had engineered while supposedly repairing a music console. The song that blared across all channels was an ancient Earth marching tune, whose rhythmic structure matched the firing sequence of Terran railguns. First came the orbital strikes. Not the indiscriminate barrages the Veil expected, but surgical, attacks targeting only military installations. Each impact site flared with eerie blue-white light, particle beams enhanced by strange matter payloads the human fleet had harvested from the system's cometary debris field during their stealth. Approach. The commander's tactical display showed 12 of his homeworld's primary defense grids collapsing simultaneously, their failure patterns tracing out a perfect Fibonacci spiral across the star system. Secondary explosions bloomed across Veil shipyards. These detonations originated not from the attacking fleet, but from within the targeted structures themselves. The humans' earlier surrender had transmitted final activation codes to sabotage packages installed by Terran operatives, posing as merchant crews over the past 3 years. Each bomb's yield had been carefully calculated to minimize civilian casualties while maximizing industrial destruction, collateral damage ratios that would later be studied in military academies across 3 galaxies. The most devastating blow came from within. Veil Core warships turned their weapons on each other as malware buried deep in their targeting systems activated. This wasn't brute force hacking. The humans' people had painstakingly altered maintenance records over generations, ensuring key systems received firmware updates containing hidden command protocols. A single spilled coffee months earlier had given the human access to the database controlling those updates. Station security drones snapped to attention, their weapon arms swiveling with uncharacteristic speed. These weren't the station's original defensive units anymore. Over weeks of routine maintenance, the human had been replacing their core processors with Terran-designed duplicates. The swaps went unnoticed because he'd preserved each unit's original serial numbers, engraving them onto the replacement parts using a laser etcher concealed in his belt buckle. Rule 3, the human said, raising the mug in what appeared to be a toast. The gesture aligned its internal fractures with the station's main power conduit, completing a circuit that surged through every Veilcom system in the sector. Translated into 37 languages simultaneously, his final words burned across tactical displays from frontline fighters to high command chambers. We finished the game. External cameras captured the first Terran boarding craft impacting the station's docking collar. Their approach vectors exactly matched the paths the human had traced with his mug during weeks of seemingly absent-minded table rotations. The docking clamps released without resistance. Their control systems compromised when the human accidentally activated emergency release protocols while demonstrating how Earth-style coffee makers worked for curious alien engineers. Inside the command nexus, multiple Veil warriors drew sidearms in unison. Their plasma pistols discharged in perfect synchronization and exploded in their hands. The human had spent weeks subtly altering the station's armory recharge stations, introducing microscopic imperfections into energy cells that created cumulative stress fractures after precisely 7 firing cycles. None of the Veil had kept count of their weapon discharges until it was too late. 10 minutes to the second from when the confrontation began, the human fleet's flagship transmitted a single tight beam message. The signal bypassed all encryption protocols by traveling through the quantum-entangled particles still decaying in the mug's ceramic matrix. It contained just 3 words, a tactical update that also served as humanity's verdict on galactic power dynamics. Game clock expired. And with that, the second half began. Space didn't part for the human fleet. It simply stopped hiding them. One moment, the sector's tactical displays showed empty void. The next, warships occupied every optimal firing position, not decloaking, but revealing they'd been there all along. The Veil sensors hadn't failed to detect incoming vessels. They'd been fed false emptiness for weeks by compromised buoy networks the human had recalibrated during routine navigation checks. Cloaking fields dissolved section by section like ice sheets breaking apart. Not individual ships, entire battle groups materialized in perfect formation, their positions mirroring the scratches on the human's mug. The alignment wasn't coincidence. Each ceramic mark corresponded to a celestial coordinate, worn into the clay through years of deliberate rotations against known stellar maps. "We time everything," the human said. His statement wasn't bravado. The fleet's emergence synchronized, precisely with the commander's homeworld reaching perihelion, the orbital point where its planetary shields drew maximum power from the solar winds. Shields that now flickered and died as the human's coffee-stained thermal detonators, disguised as trade goods, overloaded geothermal power conduits across the northern hemisphere. The first orbital strike hit the commander's birthplace, not because it was strategically valuable, because it sent a message. Particle beams lanced through atmospheric shielding weakened by music. Specific resonant frequencies broadcast for months by Terran cultural exchange satellites. The city's central spire collapsed in perfect silence, its fall choreographed to land across the plaza where the commander had first sworn his oaths of conquest. 3.8 seconds later, the second strike ignited Veil shipyards. The attacking beams didn't come from orbiting warships. They originated from inside the dry docks themselves, hidden emitters installed by Terran refugee laborers over 17 generations of carefully planned infiltration. Each emitter's casing bore inconspicuous coffee stains matching pH levels in the human's mug, allowing remote activation when certain chemical triggers entered the system's water supply. Precision defined the third strike. Council chambers vaporized not through brute force but by exploiting a structural weakness the human had discovered in ancient Veil architectural scrolls. His people had studied those documents obsessively during centuries of submissive, cultural exchanges. The killing beam walked through successive layers of decorative armor, each layer penetrated at its thinnest point, marked centuries earlier by artisan signatures resembling coffee grounds. The human sipped cold coffee, the liquid's temperature irrelevant. His tongue detected trace compounds confirming deep strike teams had secured the commander's private chambers. The flavor profile matched water from a specific well on his homeworld, water laced with memory retrieval drugs now flooding the conquering race's bloodstream through their ceremonial drinking rituals. Across the galaxy, sensors meant to monitor conflict zones instead transmitted the unfolding lesson to every ruling species. No empires intervened. None dared. The human fleet hadn't just defeated the Veil Corps, they'd exposed it. Every defensive flaw and cultural weakness laid bare through methods others couldn't replicate because they lacked the patience. Secondary explosions bloomed across Veil holdings, each detonation timed to local circadian rhythms for maximum psychological impact. The humans people had spent generations memorizing sleep cycles and stress response patterns across every caste. Their bombs didn't just destroy infrastructure, they shattered cultural touchstones, sacred texts burned by overheating precisely at the passages about invincibility. Station security systems that should have resisted boarding parties instead guided Terran shock troops through perfect paths of least resistance. The human had achieved this not through hacking, but by deliberately losing at station security games for months. His predictable mistakes trained the AI to anticipate certain patterns his forces now used like a roadmap. Docking clamps released boarding pods with eerie silence. Their hatches opened exactly wide enough to admit human soldiers, a measurement taken from thousands of accidental bumps against doorway sensors during pretended drunkenness. The pod interiors smelled faintly of coffee, the scent triggering conditioned responses in Veil troops who'd spent years being subtly exposed during diplomatic functions. Weapons throughout the Veil armory failed in orchestrated sequence. Not all at once. Pistols jammed first, followed by crew-served energy weapons, finally capital ship batteries. The staggered collapses matched the intervals at which the human had playfully tested firearm maintenance schedules during his captivity. Each random quality check introduced microscopic variances that now added up to systemic collapse. Panicked Veil warriors found their neural implants broadcasting surrender signals they hadn't authorized. The human had programmed this vulnerability by losing chess matches, each loss strategically reinforcing behavioral patterns the implants interpreted as stress indicators warranting automated retreat protocols. Tidal waves swallowed coastal military academies precisely as veteran instructors began morning lectures on invincibility. The timing wasn't meteorological. Terran geologists had spent lifetimes subtly altering underwater fault lines using resonance drilling disguised as sonic exploration. Orbital mirrors focused sunlight into laser-like beams that ignited only certain archives, those containing records of Veil atrocities. The targeting specificity came from index markers the humans' historians had inserted during collaborative research projects. Emergency broadcasts dissolved into static at the exact moments they would have coordinated counterattacks. The Rai interference patterns mirrored the human's mug's thermal fluctuations during his captivity, recorded patiently and replicated now across all enemy channels. Soldiers dropped neural inhibitors into their homeworld's water supplies, believing they countered Terran subliminals. The pills actually contained dormant compounds that activated when mixed with residual coffee chemicals in the pipes. Veil meditation chambers, designed as sanctuaries, began broadcasting subsonic pulses that triggered ancestral fight responses. The human had altered their acoustic profiles during cultural exchange performances centuries earlier. Medical scanners that should have detected Terran infiltrators instead marked them as friendly. The human achieved this not through technological superiority, but by donating medical data during health collaboration initiatives, data containing subtle biometric signatures now recognized as Veil biology. Climactic control systems that could have created defensive weather instead generated soothing rains. The humans' agricultural advisors had spent lifetimes tweaking atmospheric algorithms under guise of famine relief. Back on the station, the human set his empty mug down in precise alignment with the Veil Corps' last surviving command ship. Through the viewport, that vessel's shields flickered dead at the exact moment ceramic touched metal. No power surge accompanied the failure. Just the completion of a circuit started 7 generations earlier, when the first Terran prisoner allowed himself to be captured. The galaxy watched, not just the explosions or the surrenders. They observed the patterns, the way every defeat traced back to some forgotten kindness, some overlooked concession the humans had requested over centuries. In the end, the lesson was irrefutable. Humanity's patience wasn't a virtue. It was the piston driving history's most precise engine of war. Their clocks had all been running since first contact. Now the alarms were sounding. Post-war analysts placed the mug inside a triple-shielded containment field, convinced such an advanced weapon must harbor secrets worth dissecting. Their first scans showed only ceramic composites and organic stains. Their second revealed fractures following celestial navigation charts. By the third attempt, they understood the scratches weren't battle damage at all. Each groove mapped to weak points in Veil core defenses, etched by hands that had memorized star maps through decades of pretend incompetence. The stains resisted chemical analysis until a Tulak xenochemist recognized their molecular structures. Patterns of organic compounds mixed with metallic traces formed dormant chemical signatures keyed to specific environments. One stain became reactive only when exposed to the commander's homeworld atmospheric pressure. Another contained tailored nanites that activated solely within the electromagnetic field of Veil warship engines. Chipped edges lined up perfectly with maintenance schedules for the Veil's stealth fleet. Each imperfection corresponded to optimal, refueling windows when ships became briefly detectable. The human hadn't memorized this intelligence. He'd worn it into ceramic through years of rotating his drinking vessel against different surfaces, letting daily friction encode tactical data unobtrusively. The oldest human weapon, observed the teeter whale elder, its tremor nodes vibrating with defeated respect. The being traced one thick digit along the handle's grooves. Not the object itself. The act of carrying it until the enemy forgets to look. Its translator box rendered the next words poorly, but everyone understood the meaning when it added, "They turn time into armor." Galactic historians would later analyze every recorded interaction with human delegates. The patterns emerged clearly in hindsight. Diplomats who insisted on shaking hands had been depositing epidermal transmitters. Trade envoys proposing celebratory toasts aligned their glass clinks with security system resonant frequencies. Agricultural advisors sharing meals used digestive bacteria to map entire ecosystems from within. Each ritual contained layered purposes. A human complementing an alien's jewelry might be recording defensive shield harmonics reflected in the gemstones. Gift exchanges often included items whose atomic structures could be remotely altered. Fabrics woven with metamaterials that became conductive when exposed to certain frequencies broadcast years later. The mug's final act of sabotage occurred during analysis. X-rays revealed microscopic tunnels inside the ceramic, worm-like passages created through decades of acidic exposure. These channels formed a perfect model of the Veil core's hyperspace conduit network. When researchers applied power to study them, the channels conducted energy along pathways that hacked into nearby systems, broadcasting surrender codes across remaining strongholds. Only after complete dismantling did examiners discover the mug's core truth. Its clay came from soil on the human homeworld, infused with rare isotopes from their nuclear age. The material remembered. Every impact, every temperature change had altered its crystalline structure like a trauma log. Generations of soldiers had used similar vessels, each accumulating data until their destruction became the detonation sequence. Human Fleet Command retired the mug with full honors. Its replacement looked nearly identical. Same chips, similar stains. Only the handle's microfractures differed, now mapping another empire's defensive networks. Fleet mechanics noted the new mug's quantum signature matched an expanding lattice of such vessels stationed across known space. Traders, who'd witnessed the confrontation, developed involuntary reactions to human dining habits. A lifted cup made black market prices fluctuate. The clink of cutlery triggered security scrambles. One merchant faction attempted banning ceramics from trade stations before realizing humans could weaponize any object. A stylus left carelessly on a countertop later proved to contain enough data to destabilize an entire currency market. The Tulaks began examining their own cultural artifacts with newfound suspicion. Their sacred drinking horns showed unusual molecular alignment. Examination revealed human envoys had subtly altered the metal's structure during countless ceremonial toasts, embedding dormant triggers in their most cherished relics. Chefs aboard, neutral stations stopped accepting human food recipes. The dishes inevitably contained ingredients that, when combined with local compounds, created everything from explosive precursors to medical nanites. A seemingly innocent stew shared during famine relief efforts later introduced enzymes that rendered an invading fleet's biofuel inert. Security scans tightened across the galaxy, but humans simply adapted. They began carrying objects already familiar to scanners, Children's toys, religious texts, musical instruments. Each contained flaws that looked natural until activated. A nursemaid's rattle stored hyperspace coordinates in its wear patterns. Holy books carried chemical messages in their ink. Flutes produced notes that hacked navigation systems. The original mug was preserved in a museum on the human homeworld. Its plaque bore no details about strategic function. Just 3 words above the display case. Remember Rule 1. Visitors noted peculiarities. The containment field's emitters produced a frequency matching the station's old comm systems. Climate controls maintained humidity levels identical to the confrontation's timestamp. Security cameras captured odd reflections in the display, glass angles that shouldn't exist given the room's geometry. None of these anomalies could be proven malfunctions. Across human space, similar museums appeared. Each housed mundane objects from historical conflicts. A boot that helped collapse a rebel stronghold by wearing down specific floor panels. A datapad whose cracked screen formed perfect alignment guides for orbital strikes. A simple belt whose buckle had scratched access codes into every surface its wearer leaned against. Military academies added new courses analyzing accident chains, how trivial actions accumulate into strategic advantage. Cadets practiced rotating cups to map star systems via muscle memory. They memorized chemical reactions in common beverages. One training exercise involved losing hundreds of simulated chess matches to pattern enemy decision-making algorithms. The Galaxy's most feared mercenary bands began refusing contracts against human factions, not from fear of weapons they could see, but from dread of objects they'd already touched. Stories circulated about assassins neutralized by rigged handkerchiefs, spies compromised by doctored playing cards, entire battalions falling to sabotaged drink dispensers. Human delegates to new first contact species deliberately spilled beverages during introductions. Observers couldn't determine whether these were genuine accidents or subtle demonstrations, a way to say without words that every interaction might be warfare by other means. Some species took centuries to realize their capitulation had begun, the moment they offered cleanup towels. Xenopsychologists identified a peculiar human trait they dubbed tactical patience, the willingness to spend lifetimes appearing harmless while weaving elaborate deadfalls, generational strategies where grandparents planted vulnerabilities grandchildren would exploit, wars won before the first shot by combatants who never held weapons. Security protocols now required scanning all human-carried items at quantum levels. Yet anomalies persisted. A diplomat's folded handkerchief later proved to contain origami creases mapping secret bases. A child's candy wrapper's atomic structure stored encrypted battle plans. The very air around human envoys sometimes carried acoustic data in its moisture patterns. The teeter whale elder, near death, was asked what lesson it had learned. Its answering vibrations shook the room. They weaponized time itself. When pressed for clarification, it offered a final observation. The mug hadn't been special, it was ordinary. That was the true horror. If humans could turn something so simple into such devastation, imagine what they'd do with everything else. Humanity's greatest advantage became clear in retrospect. Every other species saw objects as having fixed purposes, a mug for drinking, a chair for sitting. Humans saw latent potential. Give them a paperclip and they'd reconfigure it into a key for your annihilation. Leave them alone with commonplace items and they'd assemble doom from lunch leftovers. The mug's successor currently resides on a human flagship. Its handle has different wear patterns now. Its chips align with fresh strategic vulnerabilities. Every stain contains newly tailored reactions. To the untrained eye, it appears identical to its predecessor. The only visible difference lies in the faint lettering along its base, a single phrase in the human commander's native tongue. Translated roughly, it reads, "The patient man needs no other weapon." Throughout conquered territories, former Veil officers develop twitches when humans enter rooms carrying cups. Their mandibles clench at the sound of ceramic meeting tabletops. Some wake screaming from nightmares of still-steaming mugs sitting abandoned in war rooms. Therapists tell them no beverage container can harm them anymore. The therapists are wrong, because, on the human homeworld, factories produce new mugs by the millions. Each batch contains subtle variations in material composition. Some will become office supplies, others will grace kitchen cabinets, many will end up as gifts to alien allies, and a select few, indistinguishable from the rest, are already being carried toward disputed border zones by soldiers with excellent memories and bottomless patience. The trap was set before the first human sipped coffee on that station. The galaxy saw primitive rituals where there were strategic patterns, dismissed, patience as weakness. But humanity doesn't fight wars, it engineers their outcomes before the first shot. Every spilled drink, every idle chat was a move in a game aliens didn't realize they were playing. The lesson echoes across conquered sectors now, not in speeches or treaties, but in the way veteran warriors twitch at the sound of ceramic on metal. The truth was always there. Checkmate comes from recognizing which pieces were weapons all along. Next time you see a soldier with a coffee mug, remember Rule 1.